I was clinically dead for 8 minutes during a nuclear war simulation. What Jesus showed me about 2025 will change everything you believe about our future. My name is Marcus Thompson. As a nuclear strategist for the Pentagon, I never believed in near-death experience stories. I spent my career analyzing data, calculating probabilities, and preparing for the worst-case scenarios humanity could face. I was a man of science, logic, and military precision, until I experienced something that shattered every assumption I had about reality, death, and what's coming in 2025. For 15 years, I worked in the deepest levels of national security, designing contingency plans for nuclear warfare. My colleagues and I would spend weeks locked in underground bunkers, running war game simulations that could determine the fate of millions. We called it playing God with numbers, but I never imagined I'd actually meet him. Imagine spending your entire career calculating death, not as a tragedy, but as statistics. That was my reality until reality itself shattered. What I'm about to share with you isn't theory or speculation. It's what I witnessed firsthand during those 8 minutes when my heart stopped completely. The divine revelation about 2025 that I received will fundamentally shift how you see the global changes already beginning to unfold around us. I was born and raised in Colorado Springs, just a few miles from NORAD. My father was an Air Force colonel, and my mother was a mathematics professor. Growing up in that environment, I learned to trust facts, figures, and strategic thinking above all else. Emotions were a liability. Faith was a weakness. The only truth that mattered was what you could prove, calculate, and defend with hard data. After graduating summa cum laude from MIT with a doctorate in nuclear physics, I was recruited directly into the Pentagon's Strategic Defense Initiative. By age 32, I was the youngest senior analyst in the history of the program. I had clearance levels most generals never achieve. But here's what I never calculated: how completely unprepared I was for what lay beyond the world of data and strategic models. Despite this blind spot, I loved the work. There's something almost addictive about holding that kind of responsibility, knowing that your calculations and recommendations could prevent or cause global catastrophe. I felt important, untouchable, invincible. My wife Sarah used to joke that I cared more about my computer models than our marriage. She wasn't entirely wrong. The irony is that I spent so much time preparing for death on a massive scale, yet I never really contemplated my own mortality. Death was just another variable in my equation's casualty projections, fallout patterns, survival percentages. I could tell you the exact number of people who would die in 17 different nuclear exchange scenarios, but I never seriously considered what it would mean for me to die. My spiritual life was virtually non-existent. I'd stopped attending church in college, much to my grandmother's disappointment. When Sarah dragged me to Christmas services, I'd sit there analyzing the architecture and calculating how many people the building could hold in an emergency. Even in sacred spaces, my mind remained locked in strategic mode. Little did I know that the most important strategy I'd ever need wasn't in any Pentagon manual. The simulation that changed everything was scheduled for October 15th, 2023. It was part of a joint exercise with NATO allies, designed to test our response capabilities in the event of a coordinated nuclear strike against multiple Western capitals. We'd been preparing for months, gathering intelligence, refining our response protocols, and stress testing every possible variable. I remember walking into the command center that morning, feeling unusually confident. This was the type of scenario I'd designed dozens of times. I knew every decision tree, every potential outcome, every strategic consideration. My team had run preliminary tests for weeks, and our response models were flawless. At least that's what I thought. What I didn't know was that life was about to run its own simulation on me, one I had no protocol for. The exercise began at 0600 hours. Within minutes, we were tracking simulated missile launches from 3 different hostile nations. The pressure was immediate and intense, exactly as it would be in a real attack. My job was to coordinate defensive responses while calculating acceptable loss parameters. In other words, I had to decide which cities we could save and which ones we'd have to sacrifice. As the hours progressed, the scenario became increasingly complex. We faced waves of attacks, cyber warfare components, and coordinated ground invasions. The stress was unlike anything I'd experienced, even in previous simulations. My heart rate was elevated. My hands were sweating despite the cool temperature of the bunker, and I could feel the familiar tension building in my shoulders and neck. But I thrived under pressure. That's what I was trained for. That's why they paid me. As the simulation reached its critical phase around hour 6, I was operating at peak performance. My mind was processing thousands of variables simultaneously, and I was making split-second decisions that would theoretically save or doom millions of lives. Then something unexpected happened in the scenario. The enemy forces introduced a weapon system we hadn't accounted for, a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse device that could disable our defensive grid. Suddenly, all our carefully planned responses were useless. Cities I thought were protected became vulnerable. Populations I'd calculated as safe were now in immediate danger. The pressure became overwhelming. I was staring at multiple screens, showing casualty projections that kept climbing 50 million, 75 million, 100 million deaths. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. For the first time in my career, I felt completely helpless. All my expertise, all my preparation, all my strategic brilliance meant nothing against this one variable we hadn't considered. Have you ever felt that moment when everything you thought you knew crumbles in an instant? That was my reality as those numbers kept climbing. That's when my body began responding to the impossible pressure. My chest began to tighten. At first, I thought it was just stress, the kind of physical tension I'd experienced in previous high-pressure situations. But this felt different, sharper, more intense. I loosened my tie and tried to focus on the screens, but the numbers seemed to be blurring together. "Thompson, what's our response to Sector 7? My commanding officer barked from across the room. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. The tightness in my chest had spread to my left arm, and suddenly I couldn't catch my breath. The room started spinning, and I realized something was terribly wrong. This wasn't stress, this was something else entirely. I tried to stand up from my workstation, but my legs wouldn't support me. The last thing I remember was seeing my computer screen filled with those climbing casualty numbers, 125 million, 150 million, and thinking that I'd failed. I'd spent my entire career preparing for this moment, and when it mattered most, I couldn't save anyone. The next sensation I recall was falling. Not physically falling, but something deeper, like my consciousness was detaching from my body and dropping through layers of reality I didn't know existed. The noise of the command center faded away, replaced by a silence so profound it felt almost suffocating. Later, I learned that I'd collapsed from a massive heart attack brought on by the extreme stress of the simulation. My colleagues called for medical assistance immediately, but it took precious minutes for the paramedics to reach our underground location. By the time they got me stabilized and transported to the hospital, my heart had stopped completely. The doctors told my wife that I was clinically dead for 8 minutes and 17 seconds. They worked frantically to resuscitate me, using every technique in their medical arsenal. But during those 8 minutes, while they were fighting to save my life, I was experiencing something that would forever change everything I thought I knew about reality, death, and what lies beyond. As the monitors went silent, I found myself standing in a place that defied everything I knew about reality. When consciousness returned, I wasn't in the war room anymore. The tactical displays, the urgent voices, the weight of command, all of it had vanished. I found myself floating in what I can only describe as a space between spaces, suspended in a luminous void that pulsed with life itself. The sensation was indescribable. I was weightless yet grounded, separate from my physical body yet more myself than I had ever been. The light surrounding me wasn't like any earthly illumination. It was alive, breathing, filled with love so pure it made my chest ache with recognition. I could feel my consciousness expanding, stretching beyond the confines of my military training, beyond everything I thought I knew about reality. This wasn't the sterile environment of the Pentagon briefing room. This was the very fabric of existence itself. Then I saw him. His form seemed to shift between light and human appearance, radiating compassion that penetrated every fiber of my being. When he spoke, it wasn't through words, but through direct transmission of meaning into my consciousness. "My child," his voice resonated through my entire being, "what you've been preparing for in your earthly role is but a shadow of what approaches. Come, let me show you what 2025 truly means." Suddenly, we were moving through dimensions I had no names for. The scenery around us shifted like frames in an infinite film reel. I saw the Earth from a perspective that encompassed not just its physical form, but its spiritual essence, the intricate web of consciousness that connects every living being. "Look carefully," Jesus said, and my vision focused on specific moments. Unfolding across time, I witnessed events that would shake the world in 2025, not as isolated incidents, but as part of a divine orchestration designed to awaken humanity. I saw massive shifts in global consciousness, economic systems that had seemed unshakable, crumbling not through destruction, but through humanity's collective awakening to their spiritual poverty. Political leaders who had wielded power through fear suddenly finding their influence meaningless as people turned inward, seeking truth rather than authority. The climate changes I had been briefed on in classified meetings weren't just environmental phenomena, they were Earth's way of accelerating human spiritual evolution. Think of it like a caterpillar in its chrysalis. The breakdown isn't destruction, it's transformation. Each hurricane, each flood, each unprecedented weather pattern was stripping away the illusions that kept souls trapped in materialism. "Your military mind has been trained to see these as threats," Jesus explained, as we witness scenes of transformation unfolding across continents. But watch more closely. In the chaos, I saw something miraculous. Communities that had been divided by politics, race, and religion were coming together. The external pressures were dissolving artificial barriers, revealing the fundamental unity that had always existed beneath surface differences. People were remembering who they truly were, spiritual beings having a temporary human experience. I witnessed technological breakthroughs that weren't being developed in laboratories, but downloaded directly into human consciousness. It was like watching humanity suddenly remember how to access a cosmic internet it had forgotten existed. Solutions to energy, disease, and social problems appearing simultaneously across the globe as humanity's collective intelligence expanded beyond its current limitations. Then Jesus showed me something that left me breathless, the true nature of what 2025 really means. The 2025 you've been preparing for through earthly means is real, Jesus continued, but it's not the catastrophe your human perspective perceives. It's the birth of a new era of consciousness. Your role was never to prevent it. It was to help guide humanity through the transition. As we moved through these visions, I began to understand that everything, every briefing, every strategic plan, every moment of stress about global threats had been preparing me not for warfare, but for service during humanity's greatest transformation. Imagine seeing the internet for the first time, but instead of data flowing through cables, it was love flowing between souls. I could see how every act of kindness, every moment of forgiveness, every choice made from love rather than fear sent ripples through this cosmic web. "This is the truth your world has forgotten," Jesus said, and I felt tears of pure joy streaming down what I realized was still my spiritual form. Love is not a human emotion. It's the very force that moves the universe. It's what creates stars, what binds atoms, what draws souls together across lifetimes. In that moment, I understood that every relationship, every conflict, every challenge in human life was designed to teach this single lesson. The geopolitical tensions I had analyzed, the military strategies I had developed, even the personal struggles I had faced, all were opportunities for consciousness to remember its true nature. It was like discovering that every chess game I'd ever played was actually teaching me the rules of a completely different game, the game of spiritual awakening. "But why show me this?" I asked, my question forming as pure thought. "Because you will return," he replied with infinite tenderness. "And when you do, you will carry this understanding into a world that desperately needs to remember. Your background in strategy, your understanding of systems, your ability to see patterns, these gifts weren't given to you for earthly warfare, but to help humanity navigate its spiritual awakening." Jesus extended his hand toward me, and the moment our energies touched, I experienced what I can only call a download of cosmic understanding. I saw how individual awakening creates collective transformation. I understood that the chaos of 2025 would be necessary labor pains as humanity births itself into a higher dimension of consciousness. I saw my own future role, not as a military strategist, but as someone who could help others understand that what appears to be global crisis is actually global opportunity. Every challenge would be an invitation for humanity to choose love over fear, unity over division, spiritual truth over material illusion. "The love you feel in this moment," Jesus said as the vision began to shift, "this is available to you always. Not just in this realm, but in your earthly life. Share it, live it. Let it guide every decision, every relationship, every response to the changes that are coming." As his words settled into my consciousness, I felt myself beginning to return. The luminous realm started to fade, but the love, the understanding, the profound sense of purpose remained embedded in my very essence. The transition back to physical consciousness was gentle, like being carried by invisible hands back to my body. I became aware of the hospital room, of the beeping monitors, of my physical form lying in the bed. But I was forever changed. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was how different everything looked. The ordinary hospital room seemed to shimmer with the same divine light I had witnessed in the spiritual realms. The nurse checking my vitals appeared surrounded by an aura of love and service that brought tears to my eyes. In the days that followed my recovery, I found myself unable to return to my former way of thinking. The classified briefings about 2025 global threats took on entirely new meaning. Here's the part that will surprise you most. Everything I thought I knew about my purpose was about to change completely. My role shifted from preparing for conflict to preparing for transformation. The profound experience changed how I approached every aspect of my life. Within weeks of my recovery, I requested a transfer out of nuclear strategy. I couldn't go back to planning scenarios of mass destruction when I'd seen humanity's true spiritual destiny. The strategic mind that had once focused on military solutions now saw patterns of spiritual evolution. The leadership skills that had been honed in government service now served a higher purpose. I was like a translator who had suddenly learned a new language, the language of divine love, and now had to help others understand what the universe was really saying. This is what Jesus showed me that I promised to share with you. Consciousness truly does exist beyond the physical brain. And 2025 isn't humanity's end. It's our graduation into higher awareness. The love I experienced in those timeless moments with Jesus wasn't a hallucination or wishful thinking. It was the most real thing I had ever encountered. It was the fundamental force underlying all existence, waiting patiently for humanity to remember its true nature. Every day since my return, I've carried the responsibility of sharing this message. Now you know what I know. The events of 2025 are not something to fear, but something to embrace as humanity's graduation into higher consciousness. You've seen through my experience that what appears to be global crisis is actually spiritual opportunity. Each of us has a role to play in this transformation, not through fighting against change, but by embodying the love and understanding that will guide us through it. As I reflect on this experience, I realize that what we call death is simply a temporary separation from our true home. The love that connects all beings, the consciousness that creates universes, the divine intelligence that orchestrates perfect spiritual timing, these are our birthright, available to us even now. You now have the perspective I gained in those 8 minutes beyond the veil. When you see the news about global upheaval in 2025, remember what Jesus showed me. Every challenge is humanity's invitation to choose love over fear, unity over division, spiritual truth over material illusion. The love that moves the universe is the same love that beats your heart and guides your soul's journey. As someone who's been to the other side and returned, I'm telling you, your consciousness, your love, your spiritual awakening matters more than any nuclear strategy ever could. How will you prepare spiritually for humanity's transformation? I'd love to know. Are you feeling called to be part of this awakening? Or do you still see 2025 through the lens of fear? Share your thoughts below.